Thank you. Thank you for that generous kind of introduction, also very kind of you. And thank you, Dawn, for having us over. So the story actually, for people who don't know how judiciary has been interfering or looking at air pollution or environmental issues, the story actually in the context of air pollution would begin about 3 decades ago. One of our iconic judges from the Supreme Court, Justice Saleem Akhtar, and I need to mention his name because he really got it all started. And this was in 1993 that he took up a case about vehicular pollution in Karachi. 93. And the direction was given that year that the cars ought to be inspected, we need to work on our fuel, we need to have proper maintenance and inspection systems for vehicles in Karachi in order to address the air pollution. Nothing much came about. Later on, a major landmark decision comes in 1994, which sets the tone for environmental movement in Pakistan, and that's the Shehla Zia case, not directly related to air pollution. It was about a grid station being set up in Islamabad and how that grid station was unhealthy for people, residents of the area, and that judgment for the first time says that right to life would mean right to a better, healthier life. So that sets the tone for the environmental movement in the country. In that backdrop, I was then a practicing lawyer, and I was teaching at LUMS, and my LUMS class became petitioners, and we went to the court, the Lahore High Court, on a case relating to air pollution in 1997. And we said the vehicular air pollution ought to be addressed because it is creating a number of health effects on people, and we need to do something about it. At that time, the judiciary did not understand. They thought this was a fancy litigation. We weren't given that respect with that petition, and that petition kept pending for good 9 years at the High Court. Because the judges were not with it, they did not understand. They thought this was just some fancy thing that he's talking about, and they said, let's attend to some criminal cases first, and let's attend to some civil cases. We'll come to your case later. And it kept, pending for a long time. However, after 9 years, it got decided, and it led to a number of interesting things that happened in that case. For the first time, vehicular air pollution was considered and recognized as a source of air pollution, one of the major sources of air pollution. It was that judgment that had some successes. We got rid of the 2-stroke rickshaw and moved on to 4-stroke rickshaw. That's the time when we moved on to CNG buses instead of the regular buses that were there. And there were certain other directions of getting rid of old buses and whatnot. So a series of directions were given way back in 1997 when it started, but much later the decision came in 2007, and those directions, some of them were partly accepted. The point that I'm trying to make is that once the case is going on, the spotlight is on the government. They are very active. They come and respond to things, and they did in this case, and I must give them credit that they did. But then everything withers away. Once the case is decided, the decision is passed, things wither away. Similarly, in another case, some successes. Dungi ground, if anybody is familiar with Lahore, there was this famous Dungi ground, which is on MM Alam Road. I don't know if the young ones know this or not, next to the Zook restaurant, if that makes any sense. There's a huge ground called Dungi ground, and that was like a park for the residents of the area. And the government of the day wanted to set up an IMAX cinema and a shopping mall on that Dungi ground. And we went up in public interest litigation at that time saying, you can't take away parks which are in the city because they are the living lungs of the city. They are carbon sinks, you see, and they regulate your air pollution. And eventually that case kept pending for a while also, and there was a lot of politics to it also. It finally got decided, and we retained the Dungi Park. If you still remember, Dungi ground is still a Dungi ground. It's still a park. No shopping mall came up, except they allowed an underground parking to that park, but they retained the park, saying the park is important and we should keep it. So the idea was that there have been successes by the court, but at the same time, There have been disappointments also in the court. There was a time when we took up a case, if you probably know, Kalar Kahar is a beautiful valley if you come on the motorway, and now there are some cement plants set up in that valley. So we went up in public interest litigation saying that you cannot set up an industry, and in particular a cement plant, in a valley, because you can't do that because of the temperature inversion. The hot air remains in the valley and destroys the area. It doesn't go out of the valley. And in India, in Dehradun, they had shut down cement factories in Dehradun, saying you can't set up industries in a valley. However, at that time when we went to the court, at that time, this was way back in 2005, I think, and the first thing that the judge asked me was, "Aapka ghar hai? Do you have a house of your own?" I said, "No, I live with my family, my parents." They said, "Phir aapko kya pata cement kya hota hai?" and dismissed the case, you see. And that was how the case just went out of the court. But 30 years later, regarding the same Kalar Kahar, a case comes up to the court where we interfered and stopped the further expansion of a cement plant in Kalar Kahar. So, I mean, there have been successes and there have been some disappointments also as we went along. But on the whole, answering the question, I think the judiciary has been rather, and since then, when I came onto the bench, we took up matters which were relating to smog in particular. 2017 is a case to mention. Was all about smog, and AQIs that were hitting the roof at that time. And we had declared, the court declared an emergency, an health emergency in 2017. And with the consensus of the government at that time, came up with an entire plan on how to address smog in the city. All those recommendations are still recorded, part of the literature, but never got implemented. So in the end, I would like to say that the judiciary has been very active. Even recently, there have been cases from the Supreme Court where we shut down about 700 stone crushing units, destroying air pollution across KP. And we said, where are your filtration plants? How come you got an EIA approved? And how are you doing all this? And we shut it down with the permission that if they put the proper filtration plants and the appropriate mechanism and get their proper EIA approved, they could come forward. So what comes out of the whole thing is that the courts have been very robustly directing and pushing the government to take care and address the issue of air pollution as well as climate change, because to the courts, people matter. What really matters is the fundamental rights of the people, especially those who can't really come forward to the courts directly. So the courts have gone out repeatedly protecting an ordinary person and their fundamental rights. That's the toolkit for us. That's the prime consideration that the judge has, to protect the fundamental rights of an ordinary person. And we build a whole corpus of jurisprudence, which, authors are sitting next to me, regarding air pollution and climate change. However, the problem is that it never gets actualized, and there's a huge gap between the jurisprudence and the reality on the ground. 97 was the first petition I took to court. 2025, air pollution can't be worse in the city. What's going on? What's missing? It's governance, it's governance, it's governance, and I see there's nothing else.